It started with a smile. Nolan picked me up just before noon, freshly shaven, wearing that charcoal blazer he always chooses when he wants to look responsible. He kissed my cheek and said, "Lunch at Lakewell, just the two of us. They've got that trout you love." I didn't question it. We drove past the lake, then past Lakewell, then past the last exit that would have made sense. I glanced at him. "Nolan, where exactly are we going?" He cleared his throat. "It's a surprise. Just trust me." "Okay." I didn't reply. The turnoff came a mile later, when I hadn't taken in years. As the gates of Silverbrier Wellness Institute appeared, something in my chest constricted. The building had changed, expanded, modernized, but the bones of it remained. I knew that brickwork. I funded its first wing. Nolan parked and jumped out before I could ask another question. 2 staff members were already waiting at the entrance, clipboard in hand. He opened my door and said softly, "Mom, it's for your safety. Just for a little while. You've seemed off." I didn't argue. I stepped out of the car and walked forward as if I were entering a hotel. Smiling, polite, nodding to strangers who looked at me with eyes trained to soften bad news. Inside, they showed me to a private room, pale blue walls, a single bed, a wardrobe. Nothing of mine. I touched the window frame. The latch was stiff. The carpet had no pattern. A nurse stepped in to introduce herself. "Hi there, I'm Ballinger. I'll be checking in on you." The name tag caught my eye. Ballinger. I knew that name from somewhere. When she left, I lay on the bed, fully dressed. The mattress gave slightly under my weight. My shoes stayed on. The ceiling was smooth, white, indifferent. "I funded this place," I whispered aloud, before he could even spell the word facility. The light from the hallway crept under the door. I didn't move. Not yet. Not until I saw who else still remembered me. Morning arrived, not with light, but with the sterile clang of a tray. Ms. Ballinger stepped in quietly, her shoes muffled by the thick carpet, a clipboard in one hand, and a paper cup of medication in the other. "Good morning, Ms. Vamer," she said gently, setting everything down on the table by the bed. Her tone was calm, measured. Clinical kindness. I sat up slowly and looked her over. Not just her face, her posture, the slight twitch in her left eyebrow, the weight of memory behind her eyes. She looked younger than I remembered, but the surname was too familiar to ignore. I folded my hands in my lap. "Tell me," I said low enough for only her to hear, "is room 217 protocol still active?" The clipboard in her hands paused mid-check. She blinked once. No surprise, no questions. Then she slipped her hand into her scrubs pocket and placed a folded piece of paper beneath the corner of the medication tray. "Don't open it until after rounds," she whispered, and left without another word. I stared at the door for a moment after it clicked shut. Then I reached for the note, slid it into my cardigan sleeve. Later that morning, after the hallway noise had softened, I unfolded it under the covers. 8 names. Staff still employed. Positions noted. 1 star beside Ballinger's own name. The others. I would have to watch for myself. But at least I wasn't alone. Downstairs, Nolan was already painting the story. I overheard him speaking with one of the junior administrators near the reception alcove. "She's been confused lately," he said. "Paranoid. It started a few months ago. We're just trying to make sure she's safe." I'd heard that kind of tone before: controlled concern, carefully curated helplessness. I'd taught interns how to use it with family members in panic. But I also wrote the bylaws of this facility. Every one of them. That afternoon, I requested access to the library wing. I told them I missed the smell of books. Truthfully, I needed paper, ink, and a door that closed. By evening, I had written the first 4 pages of my affidavit. The halls quieted after 10. I'd long since folded away my affidavit drafts, slipped them behind the lining of an old hardcover, and turned off the bedside light. I lay still, eyes closed, letting the silence settle around me. Then I heard his voice, muffled through the wall from just outside the east corridor. Nolan, laughing. Yeah, he said too loud for a private call. The house sale's almost finalized, just waiting on the court to stamp the diagnosis. Once that's in, it's mine. My breath caught. He was talking about our house, the one Darius and I built from dirt and will, the porch where we painted each other's names into the wet concrete, the kitchen I had remodeled in '87, the garden where Nolan had taken his first steps between tulips and wild thyme. Mine, ours. And now he said it like an item on a spreadsheet. I didn't move, just listened. If she resists, he said casually, we'll escalate. She's already halfway to declared. A few more reports, and the court won't even blink. Silence followed. Except for the sound of something shifting inside me. Not fear. Not anger exactly. Clarity. I reached for my wallet on the nightstand, fumbling until my fingers found the worn photo tucked behind the emergency contact card. Darius stood there smiling in a crisp flannel shirt, holding baby Nolan on his hip. They were framed by the beams of our unfinished porch. Sawdust on Darius's boots, a smear of jam on Nolan's chin. I had taken that photo myself, breathless with love. He was never supposed to become this, I whispered. I traced Darius's jawline with my thumb. Folded the photo shut. It wasn't just about me anymore. This was about what Darius built, what I protected, what Nolan now tried to sell off like unwanted furniture. He'd written me out of the picture, but I still held the negatives. The next morning, I asked Ballinger for a blank envelope and a fresh sheet of lined paper. Then I requested permission to bake for the weekly community hour. I asked Ballinger for one small favor. A package sealed and discreet addressed to Mr. Adwin Kress. No return label, just my initials inside and a card marked urgent. She didn't hesitate. Evening mail run goes out at 5. I'll make sure it slides in. In exchange, I said with a faint smile, I'll bring chocolate muffins to Thursday baking hour. No raisins this time. Deal, she said, lips twitching. I worked in the rec kitchen the next day, using my allotted 30 minutes, measuring cocoa and folding in dark chips with a slowness that calmed my hands. No one asked questions. I wore my apron, washed my bowl, and placed the largest muffin in a wax paper pouch. Ballinger whisked it away with the rest. 3 days later, I recognized his gait before I saw his face. He moved like someone pretending to belong, shoulders, loose eyes, careful. At the front desk, he signed in under a false name. Said he was visiting his aunt in Ward C. They scheduled us a therapy session at 2:30. He walked into the meeting room with a clipboard and a worn satchel. Still tall, though his hair was grayer now. The same hands, though, the kind that steadied me years ago when I first considered setting up a trust. I waited until the door closed behind him. From inside my cardigan, I pulled a folded bundle, a copy of the house deed, the trust documentation Darius and I had notarized, the updated affidavit, and a sheet detailing Nolan's verbal threats. Every page signed, dated, ink still fresh. Adwin took it silently. He didn't read it there, just pressed it once between his palms like a priest blessing a folded prayer. Then he reached across the table and set his hand over mine. The pressure said, I'm here. I never left. Let's begin. When he left, He nodded once at Bollinger without a word. I returned to my room and unlocked the spine of my library book. There, tucked in the hollowed-out center, were the bank statements I hadn't yet sent. That would come next. 2 days after Adwin's visit, a manila folder appeared beneath my breakfast tray. Bollinger said nothing, just nodded at the corner before walking off. The tab read, "For EV from 47. I knew who that meant. Patient no. 47 wasn't just another elder tucked away in long-term care. Decades ago, he'd been our records administrator. One of the few who understood that good systems weren't built with software, they were built with memory precision, and people who noticed patterns others missed. I hadn't seen him since his stroke. I didn't even know he could still write. But apparently, he could listen. Inside the folder were 5 pages of typed transcripts and 2 photocopied logs, wire transfers from my accounts, signed over in shaky imitations of my handwriting. Notarized evaluations with subtle language shifts, painting me as volatile, resistant, unmoored. And at the end, a printed email between Nolan and Dr. Halverson. Push the delusional episode's angle. That language speeds things up. I stared at it for a long time. Then I turned the page and saw a transcription of a phone call. Nolan again, laughing. She won't even know what hit her. By the time she's out, I'll be living in that house. Maybe finally rip out that awful garden. I set the folder down and exhaled slowly. I pulled out a fresh sheet of lined paper and wrote the next affidavit. This time, I included dates, voices, accounts. My handwriting looped slower now, steadier, because there was no room for error. When it was done, I slid everything into a large envelope, sealed it tight, and wrote in block letters. To George Rannell. Confidential. Direct handling only. Bollinger took it without a word, slipping it into the secured staff drop box before the evening mail pull. Later that day, Nolan arrived unannounced. Breezy, polished, with a bouquet of 2 bright sunflowers. He leaned in, cheerful. Feeling better, Mom. I met his eyes without blinking. Much better than you think. I watched him leave through the mirrored hallway, his reflection breaking slightly every few feet, then reached for the index file labeled Horizon Holdings, LLC. George called me from a Virginia number I hadn't dialed in years. His voice, rough from age and tobacco, softened only when he said Darris's name. I read everything he told me, every page you sent. I thought you might be the last one left who knew what to do with it, I replied. He chuckled low and tight. Your son didn't read the fine print, Ed. He had no idea the trust still held title to this place through Horizon Holdings. That name hasn't been touched in 23 years. That trust, the one Darris and I established when we weren't much older than Nolan, is now still held 62% of the grounds beneath Silverbrier. The walls may have changed. The faces, the furniture, even the clinic name. But the dirt, that was still ours. George didn't wait. He filed a trustee audit and invoked a clause that froze all operational changes pending review. No staff reassignment, no patient classification shifts, no new guardianship paperwork. Everything paused. I noticed the difference within hours. Staff no longer deferred to Nolan's polished voice or expensive watch. They kept a polite distance as if unsure whether he belonged here at all. A few wouldn't even meet his eyes. I saw Bollinger whisper something to the receptionist as he signed in her face, unreadable. By the time Nolan reached my room that afternoon, the edges of his composure were cracking. What did you do? He asked. I was folding a sweater slowly. Just read what was already there. He left without another word, and I watched his reflection retreat down the corridor, shoulders tight. I hadn't even needed to raise my voice. Later, Bollinger slid a memo under my door. The audit had begun. A formal meeting was scheduled in 3 days with trustee presence and legal observers. I placed the memo beneath the Horizon file and reached for my tea. The room felt warmer than usual. Then I opened the second envelope George had sent. Inside was the original deed to our family home, notarized and untouched. The call came during my morning reading hour. I almost didn't answer. But when I saw the number local area code real estate exchange, I picked up. Mrs. Vamer. This is Colleen with Bridal and Crest Realty. I'm a bit confused. Your son submitted a title transfer form for your property last week, but the clerk flagged it. The trust name listed doesn't match any legally recognized entity. I closed my book slowly. That's because the house isn't in my name anymore. I could hear her blink through the silence. The Darris Vamer Literacy Foundation, I continued, is the rightful owner. Filed last Thursday. Tax ID and certificate available on public record. Oh, she said. Then I suppose this deal is void. I thanked her and ended the call. My fingers hovered over the phone for a long time. That house had been the last thing I kept untouched. Its porch still had our initials carved in the cement. The kitchen still bore the marks where Nolan once crashed a toy plane into the cabinet. I didn't need to live there anymore. But I wasn't about to let him sell off the bones of our life. That afternoon, Nolan received the notice by certified mail. 2 envelopes, one revoking his financial authorization rights under the old power of attorney, and one confirming the property had been absorbed into a nonprofit. Not a cent of it tied to me directly. Not a path he could trace. He came barreling into Silverbrier 2 hours later. No flowers, no practiced smile, just fury under a blazer. "You'll regret this, Mom," he hissed through clenched teeth in the corridor. I turned to him calmly. "You can't threaten someone who's already been erased." His jaw moved, but no sound came out. I walked past him toward the community room, where Ballinger was already setting out art supplies for our quiet group. I sat beside the window and dipped a brush into cool blue paint. Behind me, I heard the receptionist call security. Not for me this time. Outside, I watched the breeze nudge the garden wind chimes as the sun warmed the glass. They scheduled the meeting after George's audit letter landed on the director's desk, heavy with trustee authority and legal phrasing that couldn't be brushed aside. The header bore my name not as a patient, but as the majority trust holder of Silverbrier Wellness Institute. At 9:00 a.m., sharp, I entered the boardroom in a lavender blouse Darris once gave me for our anniversary, a pearl pin fastened just above my heart, not for show, for grounding. The room quieted. A few staff stood instinctively. Ballinger did. So did an older janitor I hadn't seen in years, one of the few who had nodded at me during those early silent weeks. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. I began by reviewing the facility's founding mission, which I'd written 3 decades ago with Darris at my side. I reminded them that care without respect is custody, and that silence does not mean incompetence. Then I proposed 3 new internal policies effective immediately. First, all patient guardianships would require third-party review from an independent advocate. Second, no power of attorney would be accepted without direct patient confirmation in front of a facility-appointed liaison. Third, any changes to a resident's medical status would require recorded interviews, not just written notes. The room remained still absorbing. I turned to Ballinger. "You've held this place together better than most would in your shoes. Effective today, you're being promoted to Director of Patient Advocacy." Her hands trembled slightly as she nodded. She didn't speak, just blinked quickly and sat down. Then I slid 2 small envelopes across the table to the current director. "These are for staff who have forgotten their duty." No need for an audience. You'll find the details inside. No one asked questions. I ended the meeting with a single sentence. Just because someone is quiet doesn't mean they're broken. Outside the room, Nolan was waiting just beyond the double doors. I walked past him, slowly holding my clipboard with the updated policies. He didn't speak, but I could feel the panic finally blooming behind his eyes, and I hadn't even begun to raise my voice. He came in through the east gate alone this time. No blazer, no bouquet, no smug grin to smooth the edges. Just Nolan. Pale thinner than before, with shadows beneath his eyes that no charm could erase. I was in the solarium when he found me arranging cuttings from the courtyard herb beds. Rosemary, time a little lavender for clarity. Mom, he said, his voice too small for the tiled room. Please, I messed up. Just give me something. A second chance. A loan. Anything. I didn't rise. Instead, I reached into the folder beside my chair and withdrew a small white envelope. His name was printed neatly across the front. He took it with trembling hands, opened it slowly. The first thing he saw was the photograph. The house. Our house. But it looked different now. Its porch repainted windows open a new sign mounted above the entry. The Darris Vamer Literacy Center. In the yard, children sat cross-legged beneath the tree I'd planted after Nolan's first birthday. Beneath the photo was a check. $1. Made out to Nolan Vamer. Memo for closure. He stared at it, confused, insulted, defeated. I looked up, met his eyes fully. This isn't vengeance, I said. This is memory repair. He didn't speak. You admitted me to a cage, I continued. But I rebuilt the key. I chose not to stay locked inside the narrative you wrote. He opened his mouth, then closed it. No rebuttal. No bargaining. Just the crumple of pride folding in on itself. He left the room without saying goodbye. I watched his silhouette disappear past the courtyard archway, swallowed by the branches overhead. I stayed seated, sunlight pooling around my ankles. The wind shifted through the rosemary, carrying the faint scent of something that had once been a home. I gathered the rest of my cuttings in silence and placed them in a jar by the window. The blooms tilted toward the light, reaching without fear. That evening, a letter from George arrived, marked confidential trustee review complete. Inside one final deed. One last return. I stayed. Not as a patient. Not anymore. They offered to send a driver, a relocation team, even a quiet condo near the bay, with Darris's name on the deed. But I declined. I chose to remain at Silverbrier, though now I live in the executive suite on the top floor, the one with the wide windows and the garden view. It faces the eastern courtyard, where the rosemary thrives, and the jasmine creeps steadily up the lattice. In the mornings, I drink my tea and watch the residents walking slowly between the trellises. Some with canes, some with stories they finally feel safe enough to share. The place breathes differently now. Staff aren't stiff with fear or silent obedience. They ask questions. They laugh. A small library has opened downstairs and the music room is active again. Real jazz, not the hollow imitation, piped through the halls. The new mural went up last week in the East Corridor. It's a tribute to Silverbrier's origins, portraits of its founders, the hands that built it, the quiet ones who shaped its policies. In the bottom right corner, just beside the plaque that reads, "Respect is a right, not a perk," are two painted figures. Darris in his brown vest, me in my lavender blouse. We're not smiling, we're standing. I stir my tea slowly, the scent of mint rising with the steam. From the rec room down the hall, soft jazz threads through the air, something smooth and familiar. He thought he buried me here, I whisper into the light. But this was always my ground to grow from. Across the hallway, Bollinger waves as she passes with a clipboard leading a group of new residents on their welcome tour. One of them catches my eye, bright scarf. Sharp eyes may be my age. She pauses and smiles, like she already understands more than she's saying. I smile back and take another sip. The world outside may not know what happened here, but inside these walls, stories have shifted. Roots have deepened, and I no longer need to escape. I already reclaimed what matters.